Professor Giona Tuccini is full professor of Italian studies at UCT, and he will be our host today in the figure of Leonardo da Vinci, who is, as said, one of the greatest figures in art history, human history, so he needs more than a short introduction, and Giona will introduce you and me to Leonardo. Thank you very much, enjoy the presentation and the movie.
So I wish to thank Dr. Fabio Troisi from the Italian Cultural Institute for the opportunity he has given me today of presenting the documentary Leonardo Cinquecento, and in particular for inviting me to talk about one of the most important figures of the Renaissance, one I particularly admire. If we had to pinpoint the reason for the wide appeal of this brilliant mind, we would say without hesitation that Leonardo is a prototype of modern scientists because he considered problems in the face of laws established by others. With his works, among the most innovative in art history, he subverted the world of painting. One only need to think about the use he made of perspective, starting from the study of Filippo Brunelleschi and Don Battista Alberti. Leonardo collected books on this topic. For a man of his times, and essentially disinclined to reading Latin, he was a great book collector, owning 150. His relationship with science, based on direct experience and observation, fundamental concept of modern scientific thinking, is made very clear in his passion for botany, biology, and anatomy in particular. Leonardo got his name from the town in the Florentine countryside, where he was born on 15 April 1452. His father, Pietro, was a well-respected state bookkeeper, while his mother, Caterina, was a peasant. Because of the different social conditions, the couple never married, and Leonardo was looked after by his father. Being an illegitimate child, he could have never become an illustrious notary like him, also because he was an unconventional boy with no great aptitude for study. His awful result in Latin and a questionable inclination towards mathematics led him to pursue a different path, drawing and working with his hands. It seems he was ambidextrous, and this would explain why his notes were written backwards, from right to left, so that they can be read only with a mirror. Lacking a traditional formal education, he had ample time to observe trees, flowers, and animals, deeply convinced that nature was the best possible teacher. This can be learned from his treatise on painting. He loved nature, but at the same time feared it, as he had experienced its destructive powers during a terrible flood that swept Florence when he was still a child. The nightmare of that experience haunted him until his death. It is not by chance that in his later years, starting from 1514, he represented the end of the world in his drawing in the form of storms and floods, evoking his childhood memories. Leonardo started creating his paintings around 1467, when, at about 15, he went to Florence as an apprentice in the studio of famous painter Andrea del Verrocchio. At the time, Florence was the destination of choice for extraordinary minds, as it was the world capital of culture, where science, art, and literature were disciplines subjected to open dialogue. Leonardo was a handsome and unorthodox young man, as much it is even said that he modeled for the David of Verrocchio. In his master's studio, he had the opportunity to come into contact with Florence's cultural elite, and in particular with the Medici family, the most important family in the city and possibly the most influential in Italy. Thanks to Verrocchio, Leonardo not only learned how to paint and sculpt, but also how to create furniture and standees for processions. In 1472, at the age of 20, he was already part of the Florence Painters Guild, thanks to his fame. He already was an eccentric artist and a capable experimenter. When he was assigned to design the realization of a shield, he decided to depict a dragon, and so he started to dissect insects, lizards, and bats to merge their traits and create a terrifying beast. The year 1473 was a memorable one. Verrocchio assigned him the painting of an angel in his Battesimo di Cristo. For the first time in the history of painting, Leonardo depicted the figure facing the observer, triggering a revolution in art history and introducing, among others, figure movement. Legend has it that Verrocchio was so abashed by his apprentice's talent that he decided to never paint again. Leonardo was not, however, the only active painter in Florence at the end of the 15th century. There were also Domenico Ghirlandaio, Pietro Perugino, and Sandro Botticelli. He definitely was the most eclectic one, as he was a treasure trove of ideas, and his curiosity would not allow him to concentrate on painting only. He wanted to understand how the human machine worked and how that bigger machine of the universe worked as well. He started filling pages and pages of notebooks where the aesthetic pursuit is paramount and where the balance of the drawings is enhanced by the perfection of the specular penmanship. In the notebook that he always carried with him, he contemplated the most varied topics, from paleontology to light to submarines. What stands out is the persecution madness of meticulous notations and the whimsical elucubrations to be remembered to impress his audience. As for his passion for mathematics, we know that he loved the rhetoric of numbers more than the precision of the thought process. And this shows how Leonardo was not a systematic thinker. In the 20 volumes of fragmented notebooks he left us, there is a very little information about his private life, while we find the exact flow of his psyche and his inner happenings. He was a fantastic observer. He studied people in taverns, in brothels, and even on the gallows. He created many grotesque portraits because contrast was for him a form of knowledge. He believed that in order to be able to know beauty, you need to know ugliness, and vice versa. For Leonardo, ideal beauty was represented by the male body. His sketches revealed a scant knowledge of the female body. In his notes, there is no information attesting any relationship with women. This led many scholars to think that Leonardo was homosexual. After all, same-sex relationships were perfectly normal in an art studio in 15th century Florence. In his notes, moreover, Leonardo depicted the reproductive act as repulsive. He used to say that the sexual act and the organs involved in it are so ugly that if not for the sexual impulse and physical attraction, the human race would become extinct. More than 400 years later, Sigmund Freud proposed his well-known analysis of Leonardo's sexuality, basing his theory on a childhood memory found in the artist's manuscript. He argued that it was unlikely that the painter ever had a sexual relationship with a woman. In 1477, age 24, Leonardo experienced the most challenging situation in his life. He was accused of sodomy and was subjected to a difficult trial. The charges, pressed anonymously to the so-called night police, were dropped for lack of evidence, but for Leonardo, the public humiliation was unbearable. His 1480 painting San Girolamo might be a reflection of his inner turmoil at the time. In this work, Leonardo not only managed to dramatically express human emotions, but also showed the high level of detailed precision he was able to attain when representing human anatomy. Although his paintings were innovative, revolutionary, and experimental thanks to that realistic perspective he criticized his colleagues of neglecting, Florence patrons still preferred more traditional painters like Botticelli. Therefore, Leonardo's popularity started to decrease. He was considered an unreliable painter because he was unable to restrict his interest to painting only, and too often he would not even complete the assignments. He used to get lost in details. For instance, if you look at the Adorazione dei Magi, commissioned in March 1481, and never completed, we understand that Leonardo painted a human figure starting from the bone structure. The humiliation of the sodomy trial and the disappointment for the lost consideration as painter persuaded him to leave Florence in search of new challenges outside painting. He was an omnivorous artist who used art and science to enhance any desire of his explosive personality. In 1482, with the hope of leaving his unhappy time in Florence behind, Leonardo arrived in Milan. He was 30 years old and felt that this city had great opportunities to offer him, opportunities that he would have never had he stayed in Florence. His first move was to try to befriend the powerful Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza, also known as Il Moro. Ludovico wanted to commission a big statue in memory of his father, and Leonardo immediately aimed at getting this appointment because of the prestige it would have given him. He sent a bold letter to the Duke stating that he would be able to do everything, offering his skills not as painter, but as engineer. In that period, Ludovico was grappling with war and defense techniques. Leonardo offered his services as military engineer, starting that he was able to realize any possible war machine. Actually, he had no experience in this field, but he was determined to impress the Duke at any cost. When in 1484, the plague broke out in Milan, Leonardo started to look for a way to reduce the risk of infection that was wiping out the population. He understood that the crowding of people in small areas would increase the risk of infection. He then designed a city split into two levels, a sort of Renaissance metropolis. And the upper level was reserved for the wealthy, and the lower section would have a sewer system essential to maintain optimal sanitary conditions. Just by browsing his codex, it is very clear that Leonardo had an architectural view of life. This does not mean that he had a personal architectural style. On the contrary, he embraced 100 of them at the same time. He was equally fascinated with engineering and geometry, but in his project, geometry and aesthetic appeal prevailed. Even if he was such an aesthetically perfectionist and often very theoretically convoluted, Leonardo managed to curry favor with Ludovico Moro, who in 1489 employed him as court engineer. His assignments were very varied, from designing hydraulic systems to costumes designed for shows. He filled pages upon pages with a project to reinforce the already massive walls of the Sforza castle. The threat of war drove him to design, among other things, a bridge that would self-destruct at enemy's passage, a sort of rudimentary machine gun, and even a flamethrower thrower. Being obsessed with water, he also designed a life buoy, water skis, a dove's mask, and studied new navigation systems. Military machinery fascinated him, but he was at the same time very aware of the moral concerns involved, convinced that evil people would have used his inventions to sink ships and their crews. A little known fact about Leonardo is that he was a vegetarian. On this topic, he wrote that our bodies increasingly are animals' graves. It seemed that he loved animals so much that when he went to the market, he used to buy caged birds and release them to give them back their freedom. He was very interested in horses. He uses to draw them everywhere. The horse for the equestrian statue dedicated to Ludovico's father was never realized. The bronze eye mark for it was used to build new cannons needed for defense against the French, who in the meanwhile attacked Milan. The 300-year rule of the Sforza family was at the end. He's a haunted, and at only 42 years old, he started to look for a new patron. Just when he was about to leave Milan in 1495, he was commissioned with the decoration of the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie. The subject was the Last Supper of Jesus with the apostles. In his fresco, Leonardo gave prominence to Judas Iscariot, and this is because of the betrayal he felt while on trial for sodomy, was still impressed upon his mind, as it is also clear from his notebook. At the beginning of the 16th century, Leonardo was in high demand among Italian noblemen for portraits, but this activity did not interest him. In those years, in 1501, he started a religious-themed work depicting the Virgin Mary sitting on the lap of the mother, of her mother, Saint Anne, while leaning towards Jesus. The turmoil of the child is evident while he clutches at the lamb and shows his tender emotions. In this canvas, Leonardo reveals a mother-son relationship unprecedented for that era, representing baby Jesus and the Virgin Mary while smiling. Also, this work remained unfinished, but it sparked the interest of the Florentines that in those years had not paid attention to Leonardo, who in turn, in that period, was absorbed by different things altogether. His interest was entirely fixated on the obsessive idea of bird flight. He spent hours observing them. He claimed that flight was governed by exact mathematical laws and that mankind could replicate them, having all the necessary motor skills. He dreamed of creating a machine that could replicate the flight of birds, and already in 1495 he started experimenting. He had attached wings on his assistants' backs, but he couldn't find a way to apply power to his flying machines. He then focused on bats instead, and was able to describe gliding. He also drew a machine similar to the modern helicopter, but this was only an idea and not a finished invention. He drew many other devices that became a reality, the parachute and the bicycle. In his notes, there is a sketch of Leonardo's bike drawn by one of his assistants named Gian Giacomo Caprotti, nicknamed Salai, Little Devil, that started working with Leonardo at the tender age of 10. It is said that the boy, extremely handsome and a model for his master's drawings, later became one of his lovers. It is certain that Salai remained at Leonardo's side all his life and was one of the few that was allowed to travel with him. Just before turning 50, Leonardo found a new patron, the powerful Duke Cesare Borgia, Machiavelli's muse, who employed him as a military engineer. His endeavors while in Milan greatly increased Leonardo's celebrity. He returned to Florence in 1503, where he was well received. But in that period, a great artist dominated the Florentine scene, Michelangelo Buonarroti, Leonardo's rival and great admirer at the same time. In October 1503, when Niccolò Machiavelli was a young, influential chancellor in the Republic of Florence, Leonardo was appointed to decorate the city council hall, the most important assignment he ever received. This assignment remains incomplete as well. Probably Da Vinci realized that the city's artist production was concentrating in Michelangelo's hand. Therefore, in 1506, he decided to leave Florence for the second time. But before he could leave, he was appointed by a rich Florentine merchant to make a portrait of his young wife, Mona Lisa. This work, seemingly a minor one, would become the most famous painting in the history of art and the paramount reference for painters of all eras, thanks to the cryptic smile and the incomprehensible gaze of the subject. Some argue that the peculiar appeal of the portrait of Mona Lisa is due to a probable physical defect of Leonardo's head. This theory, developed by a medical team of the Optometry and Vision Sciences School of the City University in London, supports the idea that the Italian painter and scientist was affected by strabismus, an eye imperfection that made Leonardo more capable of sensing the details expressing the 3D depth of faces and landscapes. In 1506, Leonardo met Francesco Merzi, who soon became his favorite student. In 1513, the pair went to Rome, together with Salai, hoping to be able to contribute to the decoration of the new Basilica of St. Peter. Their expectations, however, were soon crushed, as Leonardo did not receive the welcome he thought he deserved. Even if in recent years Leonardo had been excluded from the artistic circles, his influence was palpable in works of other well-known painters, the likes of Raffaello, who painted him homage by portraying him as Plato in the School of Athens, and Michelangelo, who most probably copied his engraving technique on the frescoes of the Sistine Chapel. Da Vinci's genius had long been more interested in science rather than painting. He was particularly intrigued by the human body, and in order to better understand its inner workings in details, started to dissect corpses. Secular all his life, Leonardo had no qualms in practicing this repulsive activity. The story goes that once he waited at the hospital for a 100-year-old man to die, so he could dissect him to investigate what caused such a peaceful death. His report on this is considered the very first account of atherosclerosis. Leonardo was very fond of the nights he spent dissecting corpses for its mere scientific value, but many considered his interest macabre. Vatican authorities were alerted to his autopsies and promptly accused him of necrophilia and concealment of corpses. In 1514, he was forced to interrupt his studies. But now, in his 60s and totally dissatisfied, in 1516, Leonardo was invited by the King of France, Francis I, to join his court. The artist gladly accepted the offer, leaving Italy permanently. The king was thrilled to have such a brilliant mind at his palace. Even if he spent his time solving complex geometrical riddles, Leonardo had aged dramatically and was unable to engage in devising new invention. Soon after, around 1518, Leonardo had a stroke, and a few days later, drafted his will, leaving most of his material possessions to Melzi. Even if he was not a believer, he asked to confess with a priest. It is said that Francis I was more than a simple admirer, and that Leonardo died in his arms on 2nd May, 1519. This was the epilogue of one of the most brilliant minds in history, the first of a series of fearsome men of the modern age that marked the future of new generations of artists, engineers, and scientists, as well as we will understand in the documentary we're about to watch. Thank you for your attention and enjoy the screening.